Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or Super Turbo for short, is a classic fighting game that really needs no introduction. This game is what I think of when I picture the term boomer fighting game in my head, and the amount of stabbings that I assume have happened due to Balrog throw loops is astounding. But while Super Turbo has had a passionate and dedicated fanbase for 3 decades, there is a lot of jank associated with the game. From semi-random damage and stun values, stored supers, and more, Super Turbo has a lot of gameplay quirks that the game's fanbase adapted to over the years. Since this is an arcade game that was re-released on systems that are super old nowadays, it's not like the game ever got a big balance patch, right? Released on the Xbox 360 and PS3 as a digital game in 2008, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix is exactly that, an updated revision of the original Super Turbo. With balance, visual, audio, and presentation changes, HD Remix is a complete overhaul of the original, and despite playing it constantly as a kid, I honestly forgot this game existed until I recently found my copy of Capcom Digital Collection. Not having internet as a kid meant I couldn't download this game, so having it on this disc was the only way for me to play it. Upon revisiting the game, I realized that HD Remix was primarily developed by former American studio Backbone Entertainment, the new music was created by Overclocked Remix, a video game music tribute site, and the new visuals were created by Canadian comic book studio Udon, who you might know if you're a Street Fighter fan, meaning that most, if not all of the game was created by Westerners. There's a lot of stuff to cover in this video, so buckle up and get ready to fly around the globe, because we are going to cover Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. Before we dive into HD Remix itself, we need to learn a bit about why Capcom trusted a seemingly random American studio with the Street Fighter IP. Founded in 2003, California's Backbone Entertainment mostly focused on ports of older arcade titles to the Xbox 360, like Gauntlet, Joust, Frogger, etc. However, they did have experience with creating their own brand new IPs too, like 2005's Death Jr. for the PSP. One game they released in 2005, other than Death Jr., was Capcom Classics Collection, an Xbox and PS2 compilation game that featured 22 of Capcom's arcade titles. This was the beginning of the working relationship between the two companies, and during the development of this compilation, Backbone producer David Sirlin, who you might know from games like Fantasy Strike, pitched 2 new titles to Capcom: a redrawn version of Puzzle Fighter and Street Fighter 2. While the former released in 2007, fighting fans had to wait for a new version of their beloved fighting game, which honestly wasn't doing too well at the time. I'm sure we all know about the quote-unquote dark ages of the early 2000s, so I won't get into it, but what's important is that Capcom also gave the green light to a new version of Street Fighter 2, and in an interview with the former Xbox-focused website Team Xbox, Capcom's former senior director of strategic planning and research, that's a title and a half, stated that fans were constantly asking for a high-definition Street Fighter game on Capcom's online forums, persuading the Big C to deliver such a game. While it may seem like a straight remake of the original arcade release, HD Remix is actually based on Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Matching Service, a Japanese exclusive Dreamcast port of the game that includes online play. In an interview with OneUp.com, David Sirlin reveals that in the beginning, the developers focused on getting the Dreamcast port to run on the Xbox 360 and then fix any issues that popped up during this console transition. The scope of the project was very, very small at this point, and Sirlin states that, "At this point, our project scope didn't include a rebalance mode at all, didn't include tournaments, didn't include the rollback style networking, didn't include widescreen mode, and didn't include remixed music, just to name a few things. We were most focused on getting the game working correctly, making sure all the internal settings were exactly like the arcade version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and getting a menu system up and running." The developers then received a dev kit in June 2007, allowing them to change Super Turbo's code and compile new builds of the game for testing purposes. That all sounds well and good, but the game's new art style was arguably the biggest challenge for the dev team. The character art situation was scary, because Udon and I didn't believe that the contractor could produce the quality we needed. Capcom had hope though, and we stayed the course for a while. The contractor's quality actually did improve, but not enough. They were also extremely late. I don't know the details of the course change there, but a long way into the project we finally switched art houses. This time I think Udon picked the contractor. The change on the art side took a lot of ramp up time to get going, but by the end, they delivered the art amazingly fast and it was still good quality. During my research for this video, I was unable to find who this original contractor was, but yeah, they don't sound amazing. After an online beta test was conducted in June of 2008, many networking issues were found and resolved, and speaking of online play, HD Remix uses GGPO for its networking, which was pretty uncommon to see in the early 2000s, especially from Japan. After a period of constant development and balance changes, the developers ended their work on the game just in time for launch, avoiding any potential delays. But before we move on, I feel like I have to discuss the game's radical new art style in a bit more detail. I mentioned before that it was done by Udon, and personally, I'm a bit mixed on it. Having to redraw everything about the game from scratch and still maintain the original game's sense of speed and weight could not have been an easy task, and while it doesn't look bad per se, something about it all sort of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. Some characters' facial expressions like Chun-Li's, for example, look pretty uncanny to me, and the game definitely looks like a budget title if that makes sense. It sort of reminds me of a Flash game in ways. Although it was cut from the game due to concerns over the file size, the original Super Turbo's iconic intro movie was remade with Udon's new art and animation, and yeah, I don't know about this. To be honest, I really hate to be a negative person in my videos and just in general, but I've got to say that I think the original is leagues better. Some stages were also remade too, and I actually think these are pretty cool. We can now see the Taj Mahal in the background of Dulcim stage, and the Golden Nugget Casino of the original game has now been renamed Crazy Buffalo, for example, in Balrog stage. Okay, let's move on to the gameplay now. HD Remix features the same button layout as the original. 3 punches, 3 kicks, and motion inputs for the specials and supers, so on the surface level it seems as though the gameplay is exactly the same as the original Super Turbo, but this couldn't be further from the truth. David Sirlon's personal website, sirlon.net, contains a full list of balance changes for HD Remix, and while some characters like Ryu only received one new addition in the form of his fake fireball, characters like Zangief had their inputs changed completely. Green Hand is now performed with a quarter circle forward motion, and SBD can now be performed with a Potemkin Buster input. Another example involves Chun-Li, and she lost her down forward medium kick command normal, with Sirlon writing on his website that this move only ever got in the way, so removing it is actually a buff to her in his opinion. Before we move on even further, I'd also like to focus on Akuma for a bit. In the original Super Turbo, he's banned in competitive play due to him being an overpowered boss character, but in HD Remix, he's received plenty of nerfs to place him on the same level as the other characters. He now takes more damage, has more startup on his fireballs, has a slower super, etc., so lots of work went into retooling Akuma for competitive play, but even then, I still hear that he's really busted. I've only played the original game casually here and there, and I've never tried to properly learn it, so I didn't really notice any of Ken's changes, for example. Most of the gameplay changes involve tweaks to frame data and damage, nerfing some moves that were too damaging or safe on block, and buffing those that were a bit weaker in those aspects. A character that was ridiculously strong in the original game was Old Sagat. Even though he had no supers and couldn't take throws, his range, speed, damage, etc. was all out of this world, and he's insanely strong as a result. In HD Remix, Old Sagat has been removed, and is now based on New Sagat, albeit with some tweaks to make him fairer to fight against. After doing some research, I found that a lot of tournament players didn't really care for the game's new balance, as it still has lopsided matchups, and hell, even characters like E Honda got buffed hardcore. This guy received changes that allow him to have an easier time against fireball characters, while also remaining super strong against characters who lack fireballs, so he just kind of does well all around. In the game's menus, you can turn on dip switches that allow you to change certain move properties, such as regaining the ability to store Chun-Li's super, for example. These are fantastic to have, as they allow players to experience certain parts of the original game while still keeping some newer aspects of HD Remix at the same time. Regardless of whether you like the new balance changes or not, it can't be denied that lots of work and passion went into the gameplay changes of HD Remix, and I commend the developers for this. When it was finally released, HD Remix was a smash hit. The game sits at an 88 on Metacritic, and review outlets such as Games Radar and Giant Bomb even gave it perfect scores. HD Remix's gameplay, smooth online play, and updated presentation were lauded by critics, although the new artwork did cause some division between fans. Even though a decent size of the community really liked the new artwork, the other half hated it and they ripped into the game for it. But look, overall, reception to the game was very positive. After the release of HD Remix, Capcom started to re-release more of the older fighting games for the PS3 and 360 in full HD with online play, like Third Strike for example. I'd like to think that HD Remix's success ushered in a new, digital era for Capcom, where they focused on ports of the older fighting titles with improved netcode and presentation. In 2009, Backbone and Capcom collaborated once again for the HD re-release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which also received positive critical reception. Unfortunately, Backbone closed their Vancouver studio in 2009 before shutting down entirely in 2015. Marvel vs. Capcom 2's HD port was the final collaboration between the two studios, and while David Sirlin has continued to work on competitive games outside of the fighting game genre, he hasn't done anything with Capcom recently. With all of that said and done, I honestly think I'd still prefer to play the original Super Turbo. While I do like HD Remix and have spent a lot of time with it, the game not being on PC is a blow to its availability, whereas you can easily download the original ST on Fightcade in like 3 seconds and jump into a match online. Having a full remake of Super Turbo with brand new art, audio balancing, etc. must have been very exciting to Street Fighter fans back in the day, and the game was a smash hit as a result. Capcom themselves stated that the game achieved record-breaking sales, securing a bright future for the series. If you don't have a PS3 or an Xbox 360 anymore, you can try emulating the game on PC, which is how I recorded footage, and I recommend giving this game a go if you want to experience some new balance changes to a classic fighting game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.